as a forum for our criminal and juvenile justice agencies to address a host of system-wide issues. And we're also charged to convene public meetings. Typically our public meetings are held in community settings across the city, but we certainly want to make sure that we are able to A, meet our charge, but B, to ensure that we have conversations, really important and timely conversations with our community stakeholders. Um, why this? Why now? Well, it's certainly not lost on me, and I know it's not lost on those in the community and those who've joined us, that we are in the midst of extraordinary times and extraordinary events. Um, the spread of COVID-19, which has impacted so many, certainly locally, nationally, and globally, and it's had a disproportionate impact on Black and Brown folks in our communities. And the persistent call for racial justice, which followed police-involved killings of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and the most recent shooting of Jacob Blake. Our goal is to convene these conversations with our stakeholders to lean in to these issues, to ensure that our community partners have the benefit of hearing what's happening here in the District of Columbia from the sources. And so thus we, again, are extremely honored and pleased to be able to present today's virtual public meeting. We have as you can see, we have a number of panelists, and they will be introduced shortly. I want to just highlight a few rules of engagement. We have you on mute. We will discuss and have an opportunity for Q&A. So we will get into a robust discussion with our panelists, and then we want to turn it over to you, the community, to ask questions that you might have of our colleagues, our juvenile justice leaders. I will assist our moderator, who I'll introduce momentarily, with time. So my role is really to ensure that we have the benefit of hearing all of the voices that have assembled here. And so I may interject from time to time just to ensure that we have enough time, not only to hear from the panelists, but also to hear from you, the community. So I want to flag that now. At the end, at the conclusion of the panel discussion, I will go over just the rules of the road with regards to Q&A, then turn it over to you again, our community, to ask any questions that you might have. And following that, we'll do a wrap up, and we will, and that'll conclude our time today. Again, today, our session will be from 5 to 7 p.m. So we have really a short period of time for such meaty topics. So without further ado, I am pleased to turn the program over to Yasmin Arrington, the founder and executive director of Scholarships. Our goal is with these conversations to enlist moderators, our community partners in these conversations, so that we're able to really get to the heart of questions that may be of interest and that are of interest to many in the community. Yasmin, thank you.
Thank you so much, Manon Butler, Christy Love, and CJCC for putting on this timely conversation about juvenile justice and health and racial equity, racial disparities, and what an honor it is to have some of our distinguished leaders and commanders and attorney generals and judges this evening with us, to have the opportunity to learn the work that they've been doing, how COVID-19 has impacted their work and has caused us to have to make shifts and make difficult and interesting decisions, unlike any decisions they have had to make before, perhaps. So as Manon mentioned, I'm the founder and executive director of a DC-based nonprofit called Scholarships. We provide college scholarships, mentoring, and a support network to children who have incarcerated parents in the DC metropolitan area, and we inspire them to pursue their college degree. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our distinguished panelists, and we're going to jump right in. So we have with us Miss Avis Buchanan. She is the director at the Public Defender Service. And we have Commander Mike Colligan, who is a commander at the Metropolitan Police Department, or MPD, in the School Safety Division. We have with us Judge Peter Krauthammer. He is a presiding judge of family court in DC Superior Court. We have Commander Ramey Kyle, a commander at the Metropolitan Police Department Youth and Family Services Division. We have with us Director Clinton Lacey, who is the director of the Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services, aka DYRS. We have Ms. Terry Odom, a director at the Court Social Services Division. And we have Liz Weiser, Deputy Attorney General for the Public Safety Division at the Office of the Attorney General. Thank you, panelists, for giving of your time this evening. So let's start with discussing how COVID-19 has affected juvenile justice agencies' work during the pandemic and how it has affected our youth. Director Odom and Director Lacey, how has the pandemic impacted your agency's operations and how your staff provides support to the youth under your care?
And I want to thank you for the invitation, CJCC, to join and be a part of tonight's panel. Director Lacey and I kind of talked, and we said that we would kind of approach this question in a way we think will be most effective. I'll take the lead and talk about supervision. We across court social services and DYRS, and Director Lacey will talk about the impact with respect to detention and congregate care services, where we both share responsibility and co-locate some of our services. So I think it's fair to say, and I'm sorry, before I go any further, I do want to welcome the viewers who are also here with us tonight for this important forum. I think the first thing that's important to say is that when the pandemic sort of reached the point in which we knew that as agencies, we needed to make some adjustments, because there were some conflicting messages, to be very candid, at the level of what was being said at a broader sort of government level, right? And the messages and the information we were hearing internationally. And I think that had an impact on how we as staff were seeing and anticipating where we were going, as well as our client population. So when we, thank you to our court leadership, when the determination was reached that we were going to co-locate into telework locations, Court Social Services Division was designated to work with our presiding judge in the family court, who's here tonight, Judge Krautheimer, to look at how we would adjust our services for children. So very simply, we had a couple of hurdles to cross. One of which was we had no idea that the PPE gear, that's the personal protection equipment, that we knew we were going to need to whatever degree we were going to interface with our young people, that it wasn't going to be readily available on the shelf. As we in our juvenile justice and criminal justice system realized we needed this equipment, the sort of first responders, hospitals, healthcare clinics, supermarkets, they were considered a priority. So one thing we had to do in the court, we had to change our status for procurement from just a government agency to a first responding agency, which made us a priority to get equipment. Once we got the PPE equipment, I'm talking about respirator masks, face shields, latex gloves, hand wipes, sanitizers, bleach wipes, because we just wanted to cover all ends. Then the issue became looking at, okay, what are we going to do with our programming? So for us, with our drop-in centers and with DYRS with the evening, with the achievement centers, where we have evening activity Monday through Friday, a lot of it is available during the day and into the evening, and also on Saturdays. One of the things we had to do was take a realistic decision of, could we keep young people safe? and coming in the building. And again, we didn't know what we didn't know. So we temporarily suspended the programs, and we thought we were temporarily suspending them, aligning ourselves with the public schools who were actually doing home virtual education. We then had to look at what are our primary services, the priorities that we have to do. And so we went into a comprehensive telework schedule of activities where we were covering day activity as courtrooms came online with respect to virtual hearings. We were covering them. We've been doing family group conferencing. So we went from a more face-to-face, direct contact supervision city. I think Director Lacey would agree, where a lot of our work was always about touching the child, seeing the child, hands with the child. We went to one where we were now sort of dependent on Zoom, WebEx, FaceTime, Google Chrome, and Teams as the way that we would see and interact with our young people. We also, in migrating to the telework schedule, have found ourselves now looking to transition into a partial telework that allows us to begin to have contact with our children. And so when you consider that so much of what we do involves our children coming in anywhere from 4 to 6 to 8 hours across CSSD and DYRS, Director Lacey and I talked last week about the importance of, we can't just, as Mayor Bowser and our Chief Judge Robert Morris says, you can't just switch the light switch and turn everything back on. There's a gradual progress to this that involves a couple of things, and then I'll stop my comments. It involves the assurance that our staff have the most effective and safe personal protective equipment that we can acquire. It involves retrofitting our space in the achievement centers, in the drop-in centers, so that we can achieve 6 feet social distancing. It also involves having disposable PPE gear for our children and our families when they come in and being able to distribute them. And then it involves an assessment of the best location for some of our youth coming into our facility. As we continue to migrate through this struggle, will still be important. But for a number of our youth, going and seeing them in community settings is probably going to be equally important. And so I would simply say it has changed supervision in a great way. But I think what it has also done is allow us to see the resilience and the steadfast commitment of our staff in finding innovative and creative ways to stay connected to our young people and our families. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Director Odom, for sharing on our work. As was stated, we share a joint responsibility to supervise court-involved young people in the community, those pre-adjudicated, certainly on the part of CSS, and then those committed on the part of DYRS. And I would just echo what Director Odom said with regards to, and I think it may resonate with all, that when the COVID crisis first hit the community, hit the world, came to America, into DC, people were very afraid and unsure. And so there was a rapid effort to try to gather information, to understand what were the parameters of safety, what were the requirements, and how could we continue to fulfill our awesome, huge responsibility for the young people in the community. And as Director Odom stated, there was an initial move to virtual engagement overwhelmingly. But I think it's fair to say on both of our parts that the phased approach that Director Odom mentioned speaks to our realization and our grasping our responsibility to engage young people and to have visual sites of folks, to have more hands-on once we were able to acquire PPE. And that process isn't continuing, as Director Odom said. With regards to the secure facilities, of course, there was, I would say, less time to figure things out and try to understand what could, in fact, be the best approaches. And so Director Odom spoke to the bravery and the diligence and the commitment of our staff in the community, and that's absolutely true. And I would echo that wholeheartedly. And I would also echo that with regards to our staff in our secure facilities and those who work in the group homes and the shelter homes where our young people were living in the community. The two major issues that we confronted in our secure facilities, YSC, the Youth Service Center, which is our detention center, New Beginnings Youth Development Center, which is our post-commitment correctional facility, and of course the array of shelter homes where that DYRS operates, but where pre-adjudicated kids under CSS supervision live. We jointly, both of our agencies, had to engage in a process of immediately figuring out how could we control the spread and prevent the spread of COVID, right? And that really related to acquiring proper PPE, testing, of course, which has become a major part of our effort to prevent spread. Testing of young people, screening and testing of staff. And then, of course, when needed, isolation of young people who were positive, quarantining of others who may have had contact, quarantining of staff. This had significant impact on our workforce and our young people. But we're happy to say that we, by and large, were able to gain much greater control of the situation than the initial phase. The second aspect of the effort that we both shared, CSS and DYRS, was really a process of minimizing the populations inside of these places. This is something that we always seek to utilize the least restrictive setting in the interest of public safety. So that wasn't a new value for us. That's something that we always try to do. And utilize residential placements only when needed, utilize secure settings only when needed. Faced with the pandemic, then we turned up the lens to really scrutinize and really look at every single case to see which young people could we release from the facilities in a safe way. Who could we release from the shelter homes and go back to their homes or to their families' homes in a safe way? And that proved to be, I believe, a major aspect of our work, both of our parts, to downsize the populations of kids inside of these places as another means towards minimizing the spread of COVID. And overall, while none of these processes have been perfect or without areas where we've learned and where we could improve, overwhelmingly, we consider it a success. And I would just close by saying, again, the real bravery on the part of all involved, certainly our staff and those on the front lines who kept coming to work, of our credible messengers and our partners, both in the community and in the facility, and the young people themselves, who I think we can't ignore in terms of overwhelmingly have conducted themselves in a way that I think we can be proud of. Not all, not perfectly, but many young people have handled this situation quite well, and we just would like to acknowledge that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Directors Odom and Lacey. The court is in a challenging position to help ensure due process while factoring in the health risk posed by COVID-19. Judge Krauthammer, would you please comment on the court's decision to suspend certain types of juvenile proceedings during the public health emergency and share an update on the current state of juvenile proceedings?
Thank you. So when the court became closed to the public, we had a limited number of courtrooms that were equipped to hold remote hearings. So we had to make some difficult decisions. And the court, the family court, placed an emphasis on holding remote hearings for juveniles who were detained at the time of the shutdown and for juveniles who were being arrested and eligible to be detained after the shutdown. I think we were successful in that regard. From day one, we held initial hearings in the juvenile delinquency cases, which is the hearing where the judge decides whether to detain or release a young person charged with a crime. And those hearings occurred without any delay and without ever being suspended. And I have to admit, we could do this because DYRS, OAG, CSSD, MPD, the family court staff, and defense counsel, including the Public Defender Service, all had a keen interest in protecting the due process rights of these young people. So juveniles who were eligible to be detained after arrest received all the due process protections that they were entitled to and that they had before the shutdown. And essentially they got in court what's called a probable cause hearing, where witnesses testified remotely, police officers for the most part, remotely in the court, and were able to be questioned by the government, direct examination, and cross-examined by defense counsel. That was our goal, and we met that goal. Also, immediately after the shutdown, the court held remote status hearings and sentencings for all the detained youths to ensure that these children who were not being detained unnecessarily simply because they could not get a live date in court. We met that goal. Trials for detained juveniles were the exception, because trials pose a significant challenge for both the prosecutors and the defense bar, and less so for the court. I have to commend, as Director Odom and Lacey discussed just briefly a minute ago, I have to commend CSSD and OAG for the work that they did at the beginning of the shutdown to identify which detained children they could make a recommendation to the court to consider releasing them into the community with minimal risk. And that was a massive job and something new for them to do. But they handled that magnificently. So currently, the current state of affairs is that the court has been holding all juvenile delinquency hearings for many months. So we have not suspended anything, regardless of whether the young person now is detained or released. The one sticking point still is holding delinquency trials. As I indicated, that poses the most challenge. And these challenges are significant, more so for the attorneys, the prosecutors and the defense attorneys, than for the court. The prosecutors have to get their witnesses together. The defense lawyers have to investigate cases. They have to prepare their clients for testimony. There's a lot of work behind the scenes that cannot be done during a shutdown that is performed by the lawyers in the community. The court, every judge has a remote courtroom and can hold hearings. So the challenge is really for the attorneys. But I have to say that just this week, we had our first juvenile trial. It was for a young person who was detained, and all went well in terms of the process. So, those challenges, they're not insurmountable, and we hope to continue holding trials for these young people so that the goal is to not have these juveniles in the system for a long period of time, obviously, and if they don't belong in the system, to move them out, and if they need support and care and rehabilitation, that we can provide it to them in a constructive fashion. So that's all I have to say from the court's perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judge Krauthammer, for giving us a more robust context of the pivots and shifts that you in the court system, as well as the judges, public defenders, have had to make. And it sounds like you all were successful in doing so. So now I'm going to turn over to Avis and Liz. What was the most significant impact of the suspended or amended proceedings for you?
First, I apologize for the background noise. I understand sometimes on these Zoom calls, there's background noise from my microphone, so I apologize if that's happening. Second, I don't have schools, so instead of one impact, it's hard to limit my answer to one, so I've got two. One is encouraging and one is troubling, and both are ongoing, and some of my answers piggyback off what Mr. Lacey said, Ms. Odom said, and Judge Krauthammer said. The positive impact is the way that right from the beginning of the pandemic, the Office of the Attorney General, Court Services Division, Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services, identifying children who could be kept out of secure facilities and identifying cases that did not need to be pursued during the pandemic. So the number of cases in the system is down, and the number of children locked up is down. And we think those are very positive developments and have certainly been supported by the other participants, other components of the system. This has reduced exposure to the coronavirus for children and for justice agency staffs. and has conceivably limited the spread of the virus in the community at large. This also represents an opportunity, just as the one we have in the criminal justice system, to see if lessening these types of involvement in the system could not only be justified, but beneficial. The troubling impact is one that Judge Krauthammer just talked about, which is the suspension of trials in juvenile cases. PDS, the Public Defender Service at least, has not had a juvenile trial go forward since March, although I did hear about the one, a non-PDS case going forward. And while the mechanics may have been fine, the logistics may have been fine, I'm not sure about the content. When you think about all of the norms associated with trials and the constitutional protections at issue, they assume that there aren't any barriers to physical proximity that allows for optimal representation. In order to be prepared for trial, as Judge Krauthammer referred to, you have to be able to investigate the facts. And when there was a stay-at-home order, when the stay-at-home order was in place and imposed in March, we wrestled with how to do that investigation during that period. And now we're wrestling with how to do it given the limitations that we still have, given the need for physical distancing. And each participant in the trial process, the courts, the prosecution, the defense, all of us are exploring how close we can safely get to the normal trial process and thereby preserve our clients' rights, the constitutional rights, including the right to a fair trial. How do you effectively exercise your constitutional right to cross-examine witnesses if you have to wear a mask, if you have to maintain physical distance, if you're not able to use the courtroom space the same way you are? Those research has shown that outcomes are less favorable for clients, for participants when there's virtual video proceedings. And how long does the child have to be securely detained while the system components figure out the answers to these difficult questions we're all wrestling with?
Thank you, Dr. Buchanan. Liz?
Thank you, Yasmin. Good evening, everyone, and thank you to CJCC for including the Office of the Attorney General in this really, really important conversation. You know, my reaction to the comments that I've heard is that I've agreed with every one of them. And even, you know, though, of course, the juvenile justice system is an adversarial system where the Public Defender Service or defense attorneys and prosecutors from the Office of the Attorney General are on opposite sides of cases. You know, the goal of the justice system, of the juvenile justice system, one of the goals is the care and the rehabilitative needs of addressing the care and rehabilitative needs of children, right? And so when the Office of the Attorney General looks at kids that are involved in crime in our community, we try to figure out the underlying reasons for the offenses, why kids are committing the offenses, and whether or not bringing them into the justice system is the best way to address a child's needs. When faced with a pandemic, of course, we realized, as did everybody else that is participating in this call, that a fundamental goal must be to reduce the number of kids that are being processed in the system, right? Because kids shouldn't be exposed to the virus. Law enforcement shouldn't be exposed to the virus. Court personnel, lawyers, other family members of kids that are involved in the justice system don't need to be going to court. Kids don't need to be held overnight in jail if they would otherwise be released the next day from court anyway. So there were good and compelling reasons to take a hard look at the way our system was working in order to try to reduce and de-densify the number of kids that were in the justice system. And I agree with Ms. Buchanan and Judge Krauthammer that we did a good job at reducing the number of kids that were detained. We worked with Director Lacey and Director Odom to try to identify kids that were eligible to be released early from secure detention so that they wouldn't be in as much risk of being ill, and also so that the community could be safe too, right? Because we always have to balance the public safety needs of our community when we're making these decisions. At the same time, you know, we know kids do better sometimes if they are not brought into the system at all. And so that's why we have a lot of tools in place at the Office of the Attorney General to divert kids from before they even touch the system. Working with the Metropolitan Police Department, we have at our disposal programs like the ACE diversion program. We have restorative justice opportunities. We have referrals for mental health services from the Department of Behavioral Health and the High Fidelity Wraparound Program. These are all opportunities that we like to use to divert kids out of the system. And frankly, we have been using them more than ever now in the face of the pandemic. I would say that the second really significant part of this is just what Director Buchanan was talking about. You know, court by its nature is in person. You know, these events are supposed to be in-person events. Prosecutors want to meet with their lawyers, with their witnesses in person. They want to talk to police officers who are engaged in arresting young people. They want to talk to witnesses who might have seen a crime or victims that might have been victims of crime perpetrated by kids. Those are the people that we need to work with to prepare our cases and to evaluate our cases. And it's much, much more effective in our view to be able to do it in person. The same thing, again, with the court proceedings. We rely on in-person conversations with defense attorneys, with the court, to be able to advance a kid's case, because as the judge pointed out, part of the goal of the justice system when we're dealing with kids is swift resolution of cases. Kids' cases shouldn't hang on forever and ever and ever. Kids do better when they have swift resolution of their cases, and when we can help them by identifying the rehabilitative needs that they have, and then to hopefully help them with a path forward to get out of the system if they have become involved in it. And so I would say that the move to virtual hearings has been a really positive one. As the judge said, the court didn't miss a beat with the initial hearings, and kids were able to get those initial hearings. The court was able to make detention decisions, release kids where appropriate, hold kids in more secure settings where the court believed it was appropriate, so that at least the process was proceeding. And now, as we've already remarked, we are having every sort of hearing virtually. We're having status hearings, plea hearings, disposition hearings, sentencing hearings, and now ultimately, even this week, we had our first trial conclude in the juvenile court. So our lawyers are adjusting to what it means to have a virtual trial. I completely agree with Director Buchanan that it is much, much preferable to have in-person trials, because we of course are concerned about due process and confrontation clause rights for the kids that are in the justice system. But we are trying as best we can to work in this environment, and we will continue to do so through the duration of the pandemic.
Thank you so much, Attorney General Liz. We're doing pretty good on time, so I actually there are a lot of things that are bubbling up, and I think it's great that the courts, the district court, and local agencies have been able to sort of pivot, with this, I guess, exception of the trials that need to be, really need to be conducted in person. But I'm curious, Attorney General Liz, you mentioned that, when you all are reviewing cases, you also try to identify reasons that this youth is on your desk, how they got in trouble with the law. So I'm curious to know, just based on your own research and experience, maybe what some of those reasons may be. And then also, I think I've heard each of you pretty much say that, one, that, young people really, we don't need to be holding them, having them incarcerated, or, having these really drawn out cases for long periods of time. But I'm curious, like when young people are released from prison, or they're released from detention, or their cases, dismissed or put on pause, and they return into society and the community, what is it that we do to really rehabilitate the young people, or to, maybe provide therapy or counseling, or to, as you say, even divert students, young people from getting in trouble, from ending up in the court system or MPD in the first place. So I'm just curious if you have any quick thoughts on that.
Well, Yasmin, in response to your question about what do we see as reasons why kids engage in criminal conduct and enter the system, right? Like, there are a lot of times when kids' behavior is a product of a family situation. It's a product of an environment where they live. Sometimes it's a dispute at school. Sometimes it's peer pressure. Sometimes, it's a response to being threatened themselves. I mean, kids do bad stuff for a lot of different reasons, but one of the most important things that we need to do, I think, as a community is make sure that we are not over criminalizing youthful conduct, right? Like a lot of times, there's a better path forward than putting a kid into the criminal or juvenile justice system, because the one thing that we know is that we have better outcomes for kids when their involvement in the juvenile justice system is smaller, right? Better outcomes with less touches in the juvenile justice system. And so if we can provide support to a kid, an alternative to being involved in the justice system, then that's what we should be doing, because we get better outcomes. And I know that Director Odom and Director Lacey can talk a lot about what the services are that are available to kids when they're released back into the community. Those organizations have tremendous safety nets and resources for our kids. And so, there's a lot of things that we continue to do and that we can do even in this pandemic environment.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Attorney General Liz. And we're going to put a pin in it, but we're definitely going to circle back because, we really want to, I think this is something that we really should continue talking about. As you know, there are a lot of homicides that have been happening and a lot of killings and shootings amongst our youth in the District of Columbia. So in addition to balancing due process and public health, there has also been a need to balance public safety and public health. There have been a number of policy and operational changes to help reduce the spread of COVID-19 in secure facilities, including an effort to reduce the number of juveniles or young people who are arrested and detained prior to adjudication, and the effort to release individuals from secure facilities. So Commander Kyle and Liz, if you would please describe the efforts that the Metropolitan Police Department and OAIG, the Office of the Attorney General have taken to reduce the number of youths who are or were arrested and detained.
Good evening. First, I just want to say thank you to the CJCC and everyone for allowing me to be a panelist and be a part of this important conversation. In response to COVID-19, MPD, we've really increased our cooperation and communication with the Office of Attorney General in order to reduce the number of arrested youth from being detained overnight, while they wait for their initial presentment in court. The OAG has provided us with a hotline where we can call, we can get a hold of a supervisory attorney 24 hours a day. And so when a youth has been arrested, we'll call that number and we'll discuss with the attorney on the other end of the phone different options rather than detaining them overnight. So some of the options could be, they could be diverted into a diversion program, such as the ACE diversion program. The attorney can actually make paper decisions on the phone call, whether they want to actually go forward with this case or not. If they do not want to go forward with the case, we can release the child. We can discuss possibly, instead of holding them overnight, we could release them with a custody, and the officer or detective can apply for a custody order where they could be picked up later, or actually maybe in a meeting, they could be arranged where they're not actually arrested. So they may come and we actually do all the paperwork, and then they're given a date to appear in court. Another thing that we could also do, or that we do, is at the time of arrest, they can actually be given a citation to return to court at a later date instead of being held overnight. And the idea behind that is we just want to reduce the number of kids that are in our facility and reduce the possibility of COVID-19 transmission. And so far, it's actually worked really good. We've definitely decreased the number of arrests, and everybody I've talked to on the OAG side and the MPD side, this is something that we hope that we can continue forward even after we get out of this pandemic.
Thank you so much, Commander Kyle. Liz?
Yeah, I don't have a lot more to add to what Commander Kyle said. He's exactly right. We have worked really hard with MPD to try to make sure that we can make decisions at the earliest point possible for kids that MPD is even contemplating arresting, right? And so MPD can call our 24-hour hotline, talk with the supervisor, and that supervisor can guide the officer on how it's best to proceed. The great thing about that is that the child can then be returned home to a parent or guardian, and the officer can come to the Office of the Attorney General, now virtually, of course, share paperwork, offer an arrest warrant if they feel that that's appropriate. And then at that point, OAG can make a decision about whether they're going to proceed with the case or whether, as I was talking about before, this youth would be better off diverted so that they're not even arrested or touch the system at all. And so perhaps there's a mental health issue that the child has, well, then we can go to the Department of Behavioral Health, to the High Fidelity RAP program, and say, we would like to make a referral to our program. Would you please consider taking this youth? And of course they do. We can send kids to the diversion program. Again, the goal to de-densify the number of kids that are being processed, the number of kids that are being held overnight at the MPD facility is a huge help. And it also has worked out that, you know, we are able to get through cases in a very, very efficient way because we do have that 24-hour communication with MPD. We can make decisions in real time. And kids get resolution quicker too, which is exactly what one of the goals of our justice system is. And so I share Commander Kyle's hope that we can continue implementing these procedures going forward after the pandemic. One of the other really important things that MPD and our office deals with and the court deals with is that there are kids that are in the justice system who don't show up for court, for example, miss a court date, or are in a placement in our community and leave that placement. And then what happens is there is the equivalent of a juvenile arrest warrant out for that child. It's called a juvenile custody order. And when there's a juvenile custody order, our typical process pre-pandemic was that MPD would take that child into custody. Typically, the child would be held overnight and then presented to the court so that the court can make a determination on whether to send the youth back to their placement, and also then to send the youth to the judge whose court date they missed. Well, now with the court's help and agreement, MPD has the ability to just return that child to the placement, or has the ability to give that child a notice to return to court on a new court date, so that they actually will have real notice and will not be arrested and held overnight in jail. And so for us, that is another really, really important example of how MPD and OAG and the courts have been collaborative in making sure that we're reducing the number of kids that are being held overnight in jail to be presented in court the next day for their proceedings in the family division.
That's awesome. Thank you, Liz. And who, just a quick follow-up question. You mentioned the diversion programs, but you know, folks, not everybody may be aware of what those are. I think you mentioned a mental health program as well. Who runs this? Does the court run that program? DYRS? Who runs those programs? And what services do those programs provide to youth who are diverted into those programs, as opposed to being detained and arrested and, you know, essentially locked up?
So there are a couple of different options. There's something called the ACE diversion program, and that program is run out of the Department of Human Services. And both MPD and the Office of the Attorney General have the ability to refer kids to the program directly. Once the ACE program receives a referral, they will do an intake assessment of that youth and make decisions about what services that youth may need. And it's an incredibly wide array of opportunities for kids. It's almost like a menu. It's like, well, what does this kid need? There's functional family therapy. There's art therapy. There's art classes. There's self-defense classes. There's traditional therapy. There's mentoring. There's tutoring. That, you know, the assigned mentors in the ACE program will go to a child's school and provide academic support for the kid as well. So really, the ACE program provides some terrific wraparound services for kids. High Fidelity Wraparound program is run out of the Department of Behavioral Health, and that is specifically for kids and families that have identified mental health needs. And so that is another program, and you don't need to be court involved or even touch the court system to gain access to those services. Our office offers an alternative to court process that's called the Restorative Justice Program, and in that program, kids that might otherwise be court involved, and sometimes kids that are court involved, have an opportunity to come together with a victim if their crime involves a victim and the victim wants to have a restorative justice conversation with the youth. We have restorative justice facilitators who will bring the the perpetrator of the crime and the victim together to talk about the harm that occurred, and then hopefully help those two people come to agreement about what needs to happen between them to resolve the issue and to create a plan for going forward and addressing the harm and integrating the incident into their lives so that it doesn't happen again. And so that's another resource that we have. We have an in-house restorative justice program at the Office of the Attorney General.
Wow, thank you so much, Liz. That's very helpful. You all are really, really painting the picture for us of how the system works. So now we are going to transition into talking about systemic racism in the criminal justice system and this, national and local call for racial justice. Given the persistent call for racial justice, have your agencies identified tangible ways, in addition to decarcerating the system, have your agencies identified tangible ways to help dismantle systemic racism within the district's juvenile justice system? Now let's hear from our leader representatives at each agency. How about let's bring in Commander Colligan and again, Commander Kyle. Would you all start us off?
Sure. Like everybody else has mentioned, I thank you for having this panel. I thank the CJCC, and I think discussions like this are good so we can talk these out and see what we're all doing to try to address these issues. In particular, for the school safety division, one of the steps that's actually happening, a tangible thing that is occurring, since 2005, the Metropolitan Police Department has been responsible for security at all DCPS schools. This is a $22 million contract, involves security guards and the overall security at DCPS schools. In an effort to eventually look at redirecting some of those funds to other areas, this responsibility is actually being shifted back over to DCPS. So since 2005, MPD has been responsible for training, deploying, and monitoring all aspects of the security around DCPS facilities. This involves about 300 security officers and their deployment, their training, and their and monitoring the services that they're providing. So the idea with this shift is to give the schools more control of this aspect of the of security, since they're more in contact with the students directly. And then eventually, I think the idea here is to shift some of those resources away from security and put them into other areas like mental health counselors, behavioral health counselors, things to deal with, like Ms. Weiser was talking about, the underlying issues of why the students may act out or have problems at school. So this will be a shift, eventually a shift of resources from security to other aspects that can hopefully do some earlier intervention for the students. Along with this, we will be entering into a new memorandum of agreement between MPD and DCPS, and the roles of everybody involved, the schools, the school resource officers, and the security at the school. This implementation and this shift is supposed to be completed by October 1st of this year, which in essence will be before students will be returning to school with the pandemic and with it actually relates back to COVID also. We will probably have this all transitioned prior to any students returning to the school. So that is a major shift in responsibility in the school safety realm.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Commander Mike Colligan. Just a quick follow-up question to that. Do you happen to know because DCPS is a very large organization, do you happen to know what department or committee within DCPS is going to be responsible for leading this effort?
That is a great question. I think DCPS is taking this time also to figure out how they are going to do this. Mm-hmm. My understanding, it will be under their Office of School Security. Okay. They do have an office in there. I don't think that has been confirmed yet, but I think that's where they're looking to place this within their organization.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Commander
Thank you.
Carl? Yes, most definitely. Commander Carl, do you have thoughts?
I don't have too much more to add to what Commander Colvin stated. He stated very eloquently.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. Director Buchanan? I'll just ask the question again because it was a lot. You know, how has your agency identified tangible ways to help dismantle systemic racism within the district's juvenile justice system?
So race has something to do with just about every aspect of our operations. The reason we have come to do this work at our office is because of the history of racial issues in the criminal justice system and the juvenile justice system. And many of us have been inspired by those issues to try to have been motivated to attack them. And we try to do it for justice writ large, the whole system, and justice for individual clients. And we do that in part because we know that many of the kids coming through the DC system, largely minority kids. And so we are here to even the playing field in terms of resources, representation resources, so that just because you're poor, just because you're minority, just because you're Black or brown, you don't have less than in the way of legal representation than others. We have a long history of trying to address these issues, raising the level of practice in juvenile court in general so that poor kids do have quality lawyers representing them, trying to be sensitive to the issues. We're looking outside. But I have to say that public defenders dictate very little, little in the way of outcomes in the process. We argue, we cajole, we persuade, we litigate, but we don't tell anybody what to do. We depend on judges ordering or people, system operators cooperating. But we are very sensitive to race issues where they occur in an individual client's case. We will put that and use that as an argument for a dismissal or a motion to grant a motion to dismiss, or any other kinds of ways that it can crop up. We try to address police misconduct, whether it's particularly if it's based on race or where it's based on race, and we can show that. We track data. The situation offers an opportunity for us to kind of expand that and go beyond our history. We have had a lot of changes in the system in the 60 years that we've been in operation, but given the heightened attention on the whole system, we're trying to find ways to step back, challenge some of even our own assumptions about how things have always been done. So for example, Ms. Weezer was talking about whether or not this court system is the appropriate place for this child. I think we need to ask that question more often. I think over time, people have looked at the police and the courts as a way of solving society's problems, and the courts and the police have cooperated. When you look at courts, the different kinds of individual courts like community court and drug court and mental health court, it's because society hasn't set up resources outside of the court to deal with those issues. And so people feel like, well, they'll get help if they go to court. Well, not only do they get help, they get records, they get involved in the system, they get labeled. So we're stepping back. We're looking internally as well to see where we might be complicit, where there might be some racial impact that we're not aware of in our interaction with clients or in the work we do or the way that we do it. There's lots going on. We are looking at things like criteria for probation. Years ago, we helped, I think we did, or at least the system recognized the problems of cash bail and how it impacted poor people. So we're looking at all aspects of the system, any kind of way. We use litigation, we use legislation, and this is a great opportunity for even more imaginative approaches to dealing with racial justice in DC.
Thank you so much, Director Buchanan. I do have a follow-up question for you. Do the public defenders in your office, is there a trend in terms of the clients that come before you? Are a lot of them, do they come from You know, do they come out of low income families? Do some of them have IEPs? Like, are there any, you know, because you mentioned that a lot of the youth that come before you or need your services are minorities. So, you know, if you could just paint a better picture of like the youth that you're seeing, you know, come to your doors.
95% of the kids who come through the system on any particular day are minorities, and the majority of that 95% are Black. And Director Lacey, Judge Proudhammer, Ms. Odom can talk about what they see, the numbers that they see, but it's largely a minority population coming through the courts, and most of them get public defenders appointed to represent them, and most of them are a lot of them have special ed needs, sometimes unidentified. We have an office that provides special education representation to kids in the delinquency system. So there are lots of things going on. And I agree with Ms. Reeser that a lot of things that are triggering behavior. And if you can deal with the trigger, right now, a lot of times we're dealing with the behavior. It's good that the juvenile system is supposed to be designed to deal with rehabilitation, because you can get at the triggers and sometimes help the child get beyond whatever that is. And to get on a better path.
Thank you for that. Deputy Attorney General Weiser, we're going to bring you back in here, Liz. You know, how has you sort of touched on it earlier, but how has the Office of the Attorney General, how are you all kind of thinking about systemic racism and you know what you all can do in the office as a whole, and then with your individual roles, and as you're looking at cases and things like that, like, have you all had internal discussions, and are you coming up with the policy or in anything like that?
So it's a great question, Yasmin. Pretty big one, right? But I think what I'd like to do is just focus on one sort of discrete aspect of it that I think would be illustrative of what we're trying to do, and I think it picks up really well with what Commander Colligan was saying and what Director Buchanan was saying. You know, that it's true that the majority of the kids that we see in the justice system are children of color, right? And many of those youth are poor kids, and many of them, you know, have family challenges and economic challenges, neighborhood challenges that are incredibly difficult to overcome. I think one of the things that's important to understand, though, about the population of kids that are in our court system is that the majority of the kids that are arrested in DC are arrested for the crime of misdemeanor simple assault. Okay, it is, and it's not to say that kids aren't unfortunately also arrested for more serious things, but the majority of kids that touch the justice system that we see are arrested for that offense. And oftentimes those offenses occur at school or around school, near school, or at home or around home in their neighborhoods, right? And when Ms. Buchanan said that it's true that our communities expect the police and the courts to solve our problems, you know, when folks call 911, they know that the police will show up, right? The police always show up. And everybody knows that. For good or for bad, the police will show up if you call 911, but sometimes the police aren't the proper folks to be showing up, right? Like in schools, sometimes misbehavior in school is just school-based misbehavior that doesn't require justice system intervention, right? And so Commander Colligan talked about how there's going to be a shift now, and MPD is no longer going to run that contract for school security, and perhaps that will open up some funding that will provide opportunity for other programming to occur in our DC public schools. Our public schools need more robust programming to address disciplinary issues in schools, right? They need de-escalation training for teachers and for counselors. They need mediation opportunities. They need restorative justice opportunities for kids. They need other opportunities for kids so that they're not put into the justice system. And in the same way, you know, when there's a interfamily dispute, arresting a kid because there's been a physical altercation at home isn't going to solve the underlying problems of what was happening in that home, right?
Mhm.
And everybody responds because, again, they show up when you call 911. But wouldn't it be terrific if we could think more broadly and more creatively and innovatively about providing resources for families that are at that crisis point? And if we could provide services to the family as a whole, then maybe we won't see that family calling 911 again, and maybe that kid won't be in the justice system again. And so these are the ways that we have to look more broadly at racial inequity, at discrimination in our system, and we have to, the community, take responsibility for our roles and encourage our partners to be innovative and think creatively about solving the problem. If we don't do it together, we're not going to get there. And so that's the way that we like to look at it at the Office of the Attorney General. We are we work really hard to try to continue having dialogue and conversations with our partner agencies, and everybody on this call they're important folks in our conversations, and we'll continue to do so. And I think we've made some progress, but we've got a long way to go.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Deputy Attorney General Liz. Thank you so much, DYRS. You all have been waiting so patiently. So, we're about to bring back in Director Odom and Director Lacey. But before I do that, I just want to acknowledge all of our attendees. Thank you so much for making time to come to this very needed, very timely conversation. Please, we're very soon, we're going to open up the lines, the phone lines, and the chat box. We want your questions. This is the time. We've got our agencies lined up here. So this is the time to ask your questions. So please think about your questions, write them down, and get ready in maybe about 10, 15 minutes. And we're going to open up. Thank you so much for being here. And again, thank you so much to each and every one of the panelists. For all of the work that you do in the community, for the sacrifices you make, for the time and energy you have spent in really working to decarcerate the juvenile justice system, to think about racial justice and racial equity, and to find better alternatives for our young people, and to try to prevent them, because we already know from just national research, from the Pew Research Center and the Casey Foundation, Annie Casey Foundation, and so many others, that there has been a school to prison pipeline, and there are a lot of even in our education system, right, in our criminal, for lack of a better term, criminal justice system, there are so many things that are working against our young people, particularly those who are African American, and those who are minorities, and those who are poor. And sometimes those things, those identities overlap. And depending on the communities they come from, they're facing many challenges, which, as Liz just mentioned, often lead them to getting involved in the legal system. So at this time, Director Odom and Director Lacey, if you could please enlighten us on the work that you've been doing, the work that you all do in the community, work with the New Beginnings, and your different, the different community detention centers that you have supervision over. So what has your agency done? What is DYRS doing to identify tangible ways to help dismantle systemic racism within the district's juvenile justice system?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for raising this issue. I mean, obviously, it's a massive issue, and it's one that, in addition to not being the most popular or desirable topic, right? It's often uncomfortable. But I think that events lately have, as tragic as they have been, have helped to surface this conversation on a level that I have never seen in my time. Just with regards to the national discourse, right? With regards to and discussion and acknowledgement of institutionalized racism over the span of centuries and how it's interwoven into the fabric of our major institutions. And so we acknowledge that, right? I think that's widely being acknowledged by many. and certainly by my colleagues on the call and those who are in leadership positions in the district. And I think that's a great thing, and I feel that the district has a unique opportunity to really provide national leadership on these issues. We have our work cut out for us here, of course, but I think there's an opportunity to really tackle that work. My colleagues have stated it really well. I believe that, and I interpret it as, and you use the phrase or the term, a public health frame, right? So looking at violence and looking at delinquency or criminality through a public health frame. And I think part of what has happened over time, and one of the trends which has been very negative and which has fed mass incarceration, the over incarceration of children as well in the juvenile system, has been a shift or, an emphasis on looking at what at certain points in time in history were regarded as social issues, as health issues, right, have been framed and defined as criminal justice issues, as law enforcement issues. And I think it has certainly put the police in a position of being responsible for addressing large social issues, right? Which is unfair, which is unrealistic, and which is ineffective, I think, to a large extent. And so to the extent that we can reshift looking at many of these issues from a lens of being social issues, of being public health problems, then we can begin to do the analysis, gather the data, and fashion approaches and solutions and policies that will address the larger frame and not just the smaller frame of a law that's been broken, right? Be it assault or be it something more serious. And because this is not to ignore the fact that there are serious violent crimes that take place, but I think the overall lens has to shift. And so that we can bring all that we have to the table beyond arrest and prosecution and incarceration, one part of the spectrum, but certainly just one part of it when there's a whole array of health and human services that need to be brought to the table, and to some extent are. So I think that then when we talk about addressing institutionalized racism, instead of just discussing it sort of in the global terms, how do we drill down to what's happening in DC to children of color, and why are they the overwhelming majority, at least for DYRS, all of our kids are youth of color, right? Why is that? What are the policies and practices and resources that can be brought to the table in the form of alternatives? And we're doing it to a large extent. I think our diversion work that's been talked about, the work that the court has done, that the police have done, all of us across the board, I think we are positioned, but I think it's an opportunity for us not to slow down, not to turn back, right? But to continue to push ourselves to more clearly define these issues that our young people have, and continue to improve our ability to distinguish what are the types and levels of intervention that are required, right? Why should a child be detained and deprived of their liberty? For what purpose? To what extent do they pose a risk to public safety? And what are our ways of addressing those issues, right? And so we can continue, I think, to improve. At DYRS, we're a part of that process then. We have the authority to decide which of our children post-commitment will be incarcerated or who will be in the community. So most of our youth are in the community. We don't do that in a frivolous way, but we do it in such a way that recognizes that our youth are best served in natural community settings if we can do that in a safe way. So we and this work with young people, this comprehensive, holistic approach to serving youth in the community, addresses the institutionalized racism question, because it's demonstrating that we can safely keep kids in the community and serve them and help them heal and develop and grow. And even those who do come to our secure settings, it informs the work that we do there, so that we do our best that they won't return there again, that we can minimize their length of stay in such places, and that we can maximize our opportunity to pour into them all of the resources to develop their skills and strengths. That's the young people. And briefly, one other statement I would make. So our young people have work to do, right? We provide these services and resources so they can grow and heal and learn. But we have work to do too, right? And our systems, we need to grow and heal and learn, right? And so that's the partnership. The partnership is like, how do we as systems continue to do that and position ourselves in such a way that we're not feeding the problem, but that in fact we're really addressing it. I feel very encouraged that we have a great set of leaders on this call today and in the district who are positioned, who have the philosophy and the understanding that we can really push forward to address this issue in DC and give examples to addressing institutionalized racism overall.
Thank you so much, Director Lacy. Director Odom, do you have something that you would like to add?
Director Lacy.
Whatever. Can you hear me? Okay. So I was sitting here thinking as Director Lacy spoke and Director Buchanan, and a number of things kind of crossed my mind, and I would like to kind of sort of articulate it in the way that it is crossing my mind. So at the level when we talk about systemic racism, and I think Director Lacy was hitting on this, is that there is a twofold responsibility, and in my view, that twofold responsibility speaks to sort of like the up and out, how agencies and systems serve people, but then it's also the in and around. And so there's a dual effort underway within the court, and I commend our Joint Committee on Judicial Administration, which is led by the Honorable Anna Blackburn-Risby, the Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals, and the Honorable Robert Moran, the Chief Judge of the Superior Court. And as he prepares to end his tenure, in knowing the continuity that will come as the Honorable Anita Josie Herring takes the reins, when an agency says we want to look at systemic racism from within, that is very important. That is very significant, because what that is saying, at least in my opinion, is the agency is saying that we have to look at how we rightly relate ourselves to one another. We have to look at what we invest into the work that we do. And so that I wanted to highlight. The other thing that I wanted to highlight is that as the reality and intensity of how we as a community are going to address systemic racism continues to take shape, what becomes clear in our effort to say we want to reduce the number of kids of color who have contact. Because when we talk about systemic racism and when we talk about the disproportionate population of kids of color, right, clearly there's some point checks of entry and system connection that if we were to reverse and turn a switch, we could have potentially a different outcome. So for example, like delinquency, kids come to us for screening assessment, pretrial supervision, and post-disposition by way of an arrest. That is with a law enforcement entity. With truancy and persons in need of supervision, those kids come to us by way of a referral from having not gone to school. So when I think it's fair to say that when we talk about what could some alternatives be, and Director Lacy and I was talking about this, quite frankly, last week, that simply if we said, okay, what happens when Caucasian kids get arrested in the suburbs? Like, what's different? Because there can be that contact between Caucasian youth and law enforcement arresting officers. But what transpires in that process that doesn't lead to live booking, fingerprinting, detainment, and then ultimately referral into court? So that is one potential avenue. The same thing would be true with truants. Another is to look at investing in prevention at various levels, because primary prevention is saying let's keep kids out of the system, kids of color. Secondary prevention gets into, okay, once you've had a contact, how do we either say that go forth and sin no more, we can divert you from going further, right? And then we get to the tertiary, which is you've had the contact, your case is going forward, and what is our responsibility to work with you? In core social services, as is the case in DYRS, we place a high premium on the opportunity to rehabilitate and work with our young people. I will tell you, as someone who has been fortunate to be in this job for some time now, I consider it a privilege and an honor to work with young people. I come from Newark, New Jersey. Many of my friends growing up, quite frankly, have had experiences in both the juvenile and the criminal justice system, but the vast majority of us did not. That is not to say that we did not get in trouble. And I think I can say that now because I'm pretty sure the statute of limitations have lifted. But the truth of the matter is that we had various things that we have to try to find a way to sort of create or enhance in our community. We had the extended family. We had people who looked out for you in the community. We had elders who, when there was disputes and conflict, would come out and negotiate how it would be resolved. And when this is it, this is it. So when I heard this talking about restorative justice, which I am a proponent of balance and restorative justice, it says to me we've got to invest in communities to have that infrastructure, to have those tools and those resources so that they can resolve conflict at a level that doesn't always result in calling 911, right? Because I think police do a very good job in their training in a way of responding that is based on sort of how they get trained to respond. And there are inherent assumptions when you call the police that obviously their need to be engaged is because if this could have been resolved beforehand, would you have called the police? Right. So being able to help our communities identify when do we ask for that support and assistance. The other thing that I would also say is investing in more diversion. I do want to give Judge Krauthammer a shout out on this call, and I give him that because in coming from PDS as a deputy director and coming to the court, he had a interest in seeing what I have been interested in for quite some time, and that's seeing every courtroom be therapeutic, right? Every courtroom, I believe, should have a focus and a commitment toward a therapeutic nature that could involve varying stages of pre-plea as a stage, pre-disposition as a stage, and even post-disposition. But the idea that probation would just be this, okay, here are the conditions, meet this and go forward. I think we're missing a golden opportunity when our young people come in our system. So our commitment in court social services around prevention, absolutely primary. We want to keep kids out of the system. However, when you come in contact with us, we want to make it an experience that is really an enriching one, that really focuses on building your skill sets, enhancing literacy, creating opportunities and activities that enable our young people to build competencies, to build the capacity to exist, to touch their pulse, to feel that they are present right in the moment, and that they can participate in the moment. We did a virtual review with our young people with the March on Washington, and we broke it up into various segments to speak. And we had our was facilitating it. So doing various breaks, we had conversations, and what I'm told is that some of the conversations centered around why our young people may be tempted to engage in certain conduct that is illegal. And a number of our young people said, look, it's a lot of pressure to want things, to not be able to afford it. It's the pressure of the inadequacy, and I'm paraphrasing their words, but it's the inadequacy when you look at what you have and what someone else has. It's the inadequacy when your peers are making jokes and comical statements about what you don't have. And so the question shifted to, so how does robbery and robbery snatch kind of address that? And some of the young people said, quite frankly, we can't wait from month to month for a check to get certain things. You all work and you get paid every week. You can always go back and get those things. And that was very telling. That was very telling in the sense that our young people are saying a couple of things to us that yes, some things do matter, right? They were also saying that we want to be relevant in the world among our peers. And in the conversation, it continued, and our young people did not avoid empathy. They were able to articulate, yes, we know this is wrong, and we know we shouldn't be doing it. And many of them said if our circumstances were different, we would have a different approach. So as I close, I would talk about, we have our balanced and restorative justice programming that's Monday through Friday. Our staff do an amazing job where we build competencies. We work with our kids. We really focus on helping our kids understand the origins of what they do. We provide meals every day. Our staff cook the meals, right? That's how invested we are in this model, right? And this is also the case on Saturday. And we focus a lot on activities. But I would say, going forward with respect to the zeroing in on the issue of systemic racism, if we are committed to and driven by the reality that we want to reduce significantly, I mean, really significantly, towards possibly ending the need to rely on a juvenile justice system, then I see it as my job as the director to begin to move our staff in the direction of prevention, to being a part of the community, the supports, the resources, the intervention to prevent our young people from coming. And that's going to require a different lens and a different way of thinking. Thank you.
And Yasmin, before we sign off, I just wanted to give you a time check. We have a few more moments, and I know we have Judge Krautheimer, but we want to be able to hear from Judge Krautheimer and then open it up for our attendees to ask their questions.
Okay, I'll be brief because the court's role is usually limited. Judges are constrained from taking political positions. So I don't know what can I say. Can I say that institutional and structural racism doesn't exist? That's a political position. Where it does exist, that would be a political position too. But we know the reality, so I don't even need to go there. I think what every speaker has said has been important, and what Director Avis Buchanan said is true. The courts are a proxy for much needed social services that aren't available across the city, across this country. Everyone uses the courts and the police as a means of somehow maintaining some social order that does not really involve violations of law at the root. And I like to joke with Director Lacey and Director Odom whenever they start talking about all these great programs they have. I go, well, you know what? Why don't we just have it for all the kids? Because why do you have to get arrested to get these great services? And they are wonderful services, and they're led, both of their agencies are led by very creative and visionary people. But why do I have to get arrested to get these services? And to me, that's the main question. And really, it's a matter of, are we willing to put, as a society, our money where our mouth is, right? Are we willing? We just want to talk about it? Or are we willing to provide the resources? Because if we were willing to provide these resources, we wouldn't have, at the juvenile level and at the young people level on the criminal side, these kinds of issues. But we're not. We're willing to fund the courts. We're willing to fund the police. And now there's this whole movement of, I mean, I don't agree with the term defund the police. It really needs to just kind of reorganize the funding. That's really what needs to be done. But there's always been this law and order can get the money. Everything else we'll cut. When times get hard, we'll cut the social services, but we'll fund the law and order programs because it sounds good. Maybe I've crossed the boundary of judicial ethics by saying this, so I'm going to stop now and leave it to the public to take up the slack that I may have left behind.
Thank you so much, Judge Krauthammer. Thank you all so much, panelists. At this time, we're going to open it up for questions. But really quickly, if I may, I suggest that everyone on the line take some time in your spare time and watch some of the episodes in a show called Blackish. It airs on ABC. It's with Tracy Ellis Ross, and I think Anthony Anderson are the co-stars of the show. And there was a show, one of the episodes in particular, where Anthony Anderson and his wife, they own this really, really big house in this really, really fancy and really nice, expensive neighborhood, and most of their neighbors are Caucasian. And so he realized that he could call the police as a homeowner when there was kind of ruckus or trouble in the neighborhood. So he just started calling the police on anybody. They left the trash can open, they parked wrong. And then there was a group of young, it looked like they were like a fraternity of young African-American males that were having a party at a house next door. And he stopped. And he was like, oh no, I'm not going to call the police. And the reason is because he he knew what was probably going to happen if he called the police on these young African-American males. So anyway, it's a great show. Manon, let's go ahead and open the lines and
All right.
get some questions rolling.
All right, Yasmin. So why don't we do this? We're going to just want to invite folks to list any questions you might have in our chat feature. And we also will open the lines so that we can actually see if you have questions that you may want to verbalize. My colleague, Christy Love, is going to also assist. And I see that I have, actually, there are a couple of questions that have popped up here. So why don't I start here with a couple of questions that have come in. Received a question from Amy McLaughlin. The Youth Risk Behavior Survey, YBRS, provides over 10 years of data to help DC criminal justice elevate the public health frame. This is less of a question and more of a request that you all read the 2019 report from start to finish as soon as possible. She provided that link. She also noted, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation and discussion. It brings me hope. She had to log off early. Okay, so I've made sure that I've given voice to the comment that Amy McLaughlin offered. Let's see if we have any other questions.
I know we actually do have a couple of questions in the chat. We had one earlier from Linda Lee. And this came in around the time that I think Ms. Weezer was talking about diversion options and just trying to avoid having youth stay overnight in a secure facility, but having the option to maybe issue a citation or other things and send them home while they await their court date. So the question was, what happens if the child is homeless or doesn't feel or isn't safe to return home? What are the options available?
Great question. Thank you. You know, the options are that I think the Metropolitan Police Department would probably call the Child and Family Services Administration and try to get a child placed in some emergency shelter or foster home placement. You know, there's one runaway shelter, for lack of a better term, called Sasha Bruce Youth Works that does incredible work for kids in our city that are at risk. And Sasha Bruce is a place that we often rely upon to keep kids safe overnight or for a temporary period of time.
And I see one more question here. I think it's Sarah Braddock. And the question is, will 18-year-olds and older youth in DRS custody receive information about requesting absentee ballots for the November election?
That's a great question. We're actually engaged right now. The answer is yes. And we're actually engaged in an overall voter, with regards to our youth and our families, voter turnout, mobilization. And so that's one of our initiatives as we speak. So it's a great question. So yes. I think it's important that in addition to those who are eligible to vote and who are directly committed to us, our overall approach is really to work with youth and young adults and their families and their sort of support circle or even those associated with them. So we end up impacting friends and siblings and who surround those young people. So we consider that to be part of the process, right? As part of civic engagement, as a part of participation, as a part of advocating for themselves, and vetting and seeking leaders who represent their interests. So yeah, thank you for that question.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. One from Nancy Ware, and she's actually wanting to invite MPD to discuss over-policing of Black and Brown communities.
Is there a specific question regarding that, or is that in general?
Isn't, well, I'm just reading the comment here, to discuss over-policing of Black and Brown communities. Any thoughts, reflections on that?
Well, I think that kind of goes into the discussion that we're having here and finding ways, what are the alternatives to the police responding to things that may not, at root, like has been discussed before, may not be crimes, and what are the alternatives available to us? What other resources are there, be it behavioral health, at school? Is it a discipline issue? Is it trauma the kids are bringing to school? There's a whole bunch of aspects that, maybe it's not appropriate for the police to be involved in if we can find out what the actual underlining causes are. And I think that plays into, maybe over policing on some things that are not really police related. I'll just give you an example. In the schools, something we've been dealing with before is we'll have an elementary school kid who's basically having a bad day and has some sort of episode. And we've worked with DCPS and charter schools, and they've been doing a great job on this, working as a team. But what had happened previously is they would call the police, and we would have, let's say, a 10-year-old in there who's really just having a mental health episode. And you call the police into the situation, and our response to that would be, okay, you called us, we're here, we're going to deal with it. And then we would have a big picture conversation is, what would you like the police to do in that situation? Because that's not really what our role should be as far as dealing with the students. So there are some issues out there, and we are trying to work on them.
Thanks, Commander Colligan. Commander Kyle, any perspective from the youth division, from your role at the youth division?
Yeah, just to piggyback on what Commander Colligan said, I mean, the majority of our attacks with the community is based off 911 calls. If somebody calls 911, we have a duty and responsibility to respond to that. But going forward, as Commander Colligan said, I think there are instances where maybe the police aren't the best ones to respond. So I think this is a conversation that it's being held citywide through multiple agencies. It might be better for Department of Behavioral Health to respond out to some mental crises, or just depending on that situation is. So that's all I wanted to add.
Thanks, Commander Kyle. So we have another, comment. Good afternoon, this is Latasha Butler. Good afternoon, I don't know if we're related or not, we'll have to check that out. My name is Latasha Butler from CSOSA. I would like to know if any organizations are conducting record expungement efforts during COVID-19. While CSOSA is an adult probation agency, we do have young adults under our supervision, 18 years up.
This is the Public Defender Service. We are one of the groups that is doing it to some extent. We have limited resources, and a lot of them have been diverted to try to represent people in their effort to be released from jail or from the Bureau of Prisons. But we are doing some limited record expungement, and she can go on our website, www.pdsdc.org, Public Defender Service for District of Columbia, pdsdc.org, to find out current information.
Great, thank you for that. Just as a follow-on, Ms. Butler noted, I am hoping that our clients and other populations use this time to learn how they can get their records expunged, sealed. Nancy Ware has another question. PDS, how do you impact the inadequate defense representation by attorneys who don't work for PDS, and in parens, focus was on training?
We have the Public Defender Service offers a lot of training for trial lawyers to the Criminal Justice Act bar. We also have a duty day program by which people can call and ask some specific questions, but we provide trial practice training. We were also instrumental in helping the court to adopt practice standards several years ago. It used to be that you could just show up as an attorney and ask to start taking cases, and there was no real review of your capacity, your training, your talent, your ability, and now there's something in place for the court to review panel members and track the quality of their service. And we have forensic science training we make available, as well as the trial practice training. We also have training opportunities for appellate level lawyers. Juvenile cases also result in appeals, emergency detention appeals, and things like that. So we have done a lot of training for our own staff. We offer training to panel members as well.
Thank you for that, Director Buchanan. Before I go on with some of the additional questions, do we have any folks on the line, Christy, that have questions?
So we had actually not opened up that option. If you wanted to vocalize your own question, you can use the raise your hand feature. So just kind of hover over your name and you should see that feature next to your name in WebEx. I did have another question that was sent to me in the chat, and it's from Director Lamont Carey of MORCA. And so he's just saying, as the director of MORCA, with a goal of helping adults successfully transition back into the community, he just wants to point out that he recognizes that some of the juvenile justice constituents are actually family members of MORCA's constituents and just looking for more opportunities to be able to work together.
Right. Okay, while we are, thank you for that, Director Carey. Certainly inviting folks to raise their hand. Should you want to verbalize your question, I'll go down a few additional or offer a few additional questions. Again, Nancy Ware, how can the OAG's office contribute more to the prevention discussion?
Thanks for that question, Nancy. You know, one of the things that OAG is doing is we run something called the Attend program, and it's a program that addresses truancy at the elementary school level, and we are targeting 2 schools in elementary schools in Ward 8, Turner and Patterson elementary schools. And what we've done at those schools is we are working with parents who have been identified as having truant elementary school aged kids. As the law stands now under the Compulsory School Attendance Act, we actually have authority to prosecute those parents if their kids fail to go to school. And that is not an approach that the Office of the Attorney General is trying to advance at this time. And what we do instead is we have case managers that work with those parents to try to, again, figure out the reasons why kids aren't attending school. You know, sometimes it's homelessness, sometimes it's food insecurity, sometimes it's transportation issues. We conduct mediations with those families in an effort to help them figure out a way to get their kids back into school. We offer a series of parent workshops so that parents can get some tools in the box to make sure that school attendance becomes a regular part of their lives. That program has done a tremendous job, I think, on the prevention end. I think we know if we can get kids in school and keep kids in school and establish a good pattern of school attendance, that's one of the best factors in terms of a prevention model. Other than that, we are always open to exploring new ideas about prevention, and we're very committed to it. So I would love to engage further with anyone in the community that wants to talk about those opportunities.
All right, thank you, Liz. And a follow-up question to everyone. How do the panelists feel that their agencies represent a diverse workforce that represent the communities they work with? And perhaps I'll just kind of do it so that there's a cadence to this. I can start with Director Lacey.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And we, you know, reflect the community we serve in many ways, you know, with regards to our frontline staff and our leadership. But even beyond that, I think it's been our intention and our ongoing effort to represent the community, not just racially, ethnically, and what have you, but actually having folks hired working with DYRS and or partnering with us who are from the communities most impacted. I think the greatest example of that for us is what we call our credible messengers. So people with shared life experiences who face and have faced similar challenges, who are part of the solution and part of the process of healing and empowering our communities. And so that whether they're DYRS employees, which many are, or are they partners in the work, that it's critical for us that experience and that voice is represented and in fact integral to the work that we do with our youth and families.
Great. Thank you, Director Lacey. Commanders Kyle and Colligan.
I will say I actually looked at this today. MPD, the sworn side of MPD, I think the percentage is 65% of our department is of minority, and 23% of our department is female, which in the policing world, that's a large percentage of female officers. And that is an area that we have been focusing on as far as recruiting. Also would say from the community standpoint, we do have a cadet program where 100% of those cadets are from Washington, D.C. We don't recruit for that program outside. There was plans to increase the cadet program, but unfortunately with the funding, that has been reduced. So that's just a couple of ways of or reflection of the community we're serving.
Right. Thank you. Deputy AG, Commander Kyle, did you have any? I saw the light.
No, Commander Colligan actually mentioned the cadet program, which was I was going to talk about.
Okay. Thank you, Commander Kyle. Deputy AG Weezer?
Thanks, Manon. You know, picking up on what Director Lacey said, you know, the Office of the Attorney General also has our Cure Violence or Cure the Streets program, and similar to the Credible Messengers that Director Lacey was talking about, our Cure the Streets employees are all folks that live and work in our communities, and they're, you know, in talking about a prevention model, again, their goal is to sort of identify folks that may become victims of or perpetrators of violence in their communities and work to stop the violence before it occurs. We are really proud of that program. It's been expanding over the last several years, and we are working in communities that are some of the most troubled by gun violence in the city. And so that's a very good example of a population of employees that we know reflect our community well. You know, in addition to that, the rest of the agency, we're a pretty diverse group, and I think another really important part of what makes up the Office of the Attorney General is that everybody in leadership positions at OAG lives in the district as well as works for the Office of the Attorney General.
Got it. Thank you. Director Buchanan.
I think we have a fairly representative staff. We are interested in diversity. We've been, that's been a priority for a while, for decades. I'm from this area, started out in Southeast DC a long time ago. Moved as a child to Prince George's County, so I've been in the area most of my life. We have other DC natives. We have people who we hire people who have criminal records. We have returned citizens serving on our PDS board right now. So we're trying to address a lot of different things and being sensitive to the different ways that diversity can manifest itself among the staff, but we're trying to make sure that we have the right relationships with our clients, with each other, and keeping up with our reputation as the best public defender office in the country. I had to get that in.
I was waiting for it. Judge Gottheimer.
Sorry. So as far as judges, we don't control anything. Obviously, the commission sends 3 names up to the president, and the president selects from those 3 names. And so diversity on the court, I mean, it's been there. We still have some pretty good diversity, but it depends on who gets sent up. As far as the staffing of the court, and Terry can follow up with that. The court, I don't have the statistics offhand, but there's a lot of diversity on that court, definitely, and we do reflect the community at large in the District of Columbia. So that's all I have to say on that.
And can I stick in? I do live in DC now. Sorry.
Got it.
Still in Southeast.
All right. Director Odom.
Okay, am I muted?
Yes.
I think the court has taken a great approach with respect to diversity and to ensure that there are opportunities across various aspects of the court. As you know, we have the judicial side. Judge Gottheimer just explain how that process works, so I'll touch that. But we also have the side, which staffs and supports. And so there's a great effort and continued push around diversity to address language access to expand the breadth of folks coming into the court as employees. Within our division, a robust recruitment effort that results in the development where our primary positions are concerned, which are probation officers as well as our deputy clerks. And one of the things that we've been doing now for nearly a decade and a half has to do with how we frame interview questions to really get to the exact nature of the ideal match between employee and agency, right? Because the truth of the matter is we understand a lot of the issues that the communities and the clients that we work with touch. And so if you have an aversion to working with disadvantaged people, not just from the helper helpee construct, but from the helper lift up, right? Grow into support construct, then that doesn't always lend itself to the best match. So a great deal of effort is put on the part of the screening, the part of the recruitment, the getting the word out. In the coming year, one of the things we're going to focus on is really going to a lot of the local universities, the University District of Columbia, Howard University, Georgetown, Catholic University, Trinity, GW, and even in the DMV area, but really getting the word out so that as students are in social work programs, political science programs, even accounting, we have some probation officers who are also accountants, right? We want the diversity of the skill because it allows us to be diverse in creation of our program. But really going to a number of these universities and making sure that people understand sort of the nuance of where public safety is continuing to go and just consider being a part of that experience. The last thing I will say, and it dawned on me as I think it was Director Buchanan. I want to give a shout out to Lewis Parker, who heads up our Administrative Services Division in the court, because I think it was about maybe 6 years ago, we did a collaborative effort, myself, Mr. Parker, and the head of our HR department, because a number of our contractors do hire individuals who are indigenous to the community and returning citizens. And so what we did that has had impact also with our staffing is we looked at sort of charging and arrest misdemeanors and felonies. And we were able to say, okay, what would allow someone who had a past transgression to get to a point to be able to come into the fold of employment? And so one of the things that we said was, okay, if the person had like a misdemeanor and there was 1 or 2 years where there had not been any like someone who had been convicted or this had been played down and they weren't years of continued arrest, we could look at that appointment or that person as viable. If the person had a felony, now for us, because of the statute, there are certain types of background transgressions that we may not be able to allow someone to come in. And I want to be very transparent about that. But outside of those like 4 or 5 very high types of offenses, we even looked from the felony point of view and was saying, okay, if you had been three or more years where there had been no continued arrests and prosecutions, because we do know here again is where disproportionality plays in. Like cast a wide net, you touch a number of people. Just because someone has been arrested doesn't mean that they actually got petitioned, prosecuted, and went on. And so I was thinking about that as this question was raised, because it really helped us to begin to bring in a broader, diverse array of staff for whom, without that courageous effort that was supported by our executive office, we might have found ourselves continuing to say, when we do the background checks, no, most of these people aren't going to be able to kind of like, qualify. And so I really just wanted to say that's as I sit here and think, that's a sort of a signature effort that I would like to see us build on. Thank you.
Thanks, Director Odom. Christy, do you have anyone who's raised their hand? Questions?
No one has raised their hand. I do see there's one more question in the Q&A.
Yeah, in the Q&A. Yeah, and I see this question from Miles Holloman. I'm not necessarily, I'm not 100% clear about it, so wanted to just give you an opportunity. Could you just add a little bit more context to the question to make sure that I'm able to present it as you're intending? So give you a couple moments there. All right. And I'm just curious, as we are inviting Mr. Holloman to provide a little bit more context, I want to turn it back over to you, Yasmin, to see if you have any kind of final thoughts and a final question, and give the opportunity to our panelists to offer any final thoughts before we wind down and I wrap up.
I really don't have any specific questions per se. I'm really interested in, though, how we sort of talked about it, but yeah, I'm interested to know how we are looking at, you know, the institutional racism that has, you know, that Director Lacey mentioned has existed over centuries. Because there's a lot happening in Washington, D.C. There are a lot of changes that are happening. Some things are staying consistent and some things are changing. And it you know, I think that in comparison to a lot of other states, that Washington, D.C. does have a pretty solid, you know, kind of system around how we do juvenile justice and criminal justice. But you know, I really don't have any more specific questions per se at this time. So hopefully Mr. Holloman had something good to wrap us up with.
All right, let's see. Yeah, I don't see any follow-up. Maybe we just, at this point and before, in light of the hour, just give all of the partners just, you know, a minute to offer any final remarks before I wrap up today's really just important and important session. So start with you, Director Buchanan. You're on mute, yeah. Okay, there, all right. It's on mute again.
Okay. Okay,
Perfect.
thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to address these important questions. We, as I said, think of this as a great opportunity to move forward in some bigger ways than we traditionally have. We are really thrilled with the openness that the city has to some possible reforms. We are going to continue to brainstorm ourselves about ways at all different stages of the juvenile justice process to make outcomes better for our clients.
Right. Thank you, Director Buchanan. Director Colligan, Director Commander Colligan, Commander Kyle.
I'd like to thank you for having this forum. I think it's important because we have pretty much everybody I can think of in the juvenile justice system that we deal with on a daily basis. I think these conversations are important and they're proactive, just so we know where the efforts that everybody is making and where we can make some more progress. So thank you.
Thank you. Commander Kyle.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for allowing me to be a panelist and to participate in this conversation, and also for those that are watching or listening on the phone. I don't know if they know, but everybody, all the panelists here, we all work together, you know, throughout the weeks and the days, and we attend many meetings where we're discussing all these same issues. So I think it's important for everybody to know this isn't just a one-time thing, that we're continuously talking, working together, and trying to improve the juvenile justice system here in the district.
Thank you, Commander Kyle. Deputy AG Weezer.
Thanks, Manon. I don't have much more to add except to say that I'm so grateful for the conversation, for the opportunity to have the conversation. I agree that with what Commander Kyle just said, that we have these conversations and we're continuing to have them. We all challenge one another to think critically about these issues and to push forward to make the system better for the kids that we're serving in the district. And I know that everybody that's on this call is committed to the work, and you will continue to be committed to it at the Office of the Attorney General.
Thank you. Judge Gardheimer.
For having me here with this, what this session did for me was it reinforces the importance of having good leaders, great leaders in charge of all these agencies. I've interacted with many of them, and we were able, one, to get the court up and running through the shutdown pretty easily, because all these leaders were committed to making sure that the children were being processed through the court as much as possible, and to keep as many children outside of the court system as possible. So that's the silver lining of COVID. It showed us that we can do things that we thought weren't possible. And it forced us to change the construct by which we operate. And I hope, because courts, judges, systems are usually very slow to move, right? We're very cautious, we're very conservative, and we don't want to move, and change is something we don't like. Our employees, our staff don't like change. We don't like change. We don't like learning new technology. We don't like learning new processes. And all this has forced us to do that, and shows us that we're all capable. We're all capable of changing for the better. And it's only through good leadership that happens, because you have to have good leadership so that people in your organization believe in what you're doing and what you're trying to sell to them, and to make it happen. So I'm impressed. As Commander Kyle said, I work with everybody here on different committees. I see them regularly, and I'm glad to see them virtually, because we haven't seen each other in real life for a while now. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Director Odom?
I want to echo what's been said about our relationship, together. I was talking to someone maybe about a month ago that had from another jurisdiction about 2 years ago. And this person said, I worked in a number of jurisdictions. What amazes me in DC is that you all talk. You come together to the table. You'll have the conversation. The tough ones, the ones that are not so tough, and work together. And so that is really a testament to what public service and the role of government can and should be. I'd also like to, in addition to thanking CJCC again for giving us this opportunity, I want to thank the participants. I want to thank the youth and families who allow us to work with their young people. We know that when young people get in trouble, they come on the radar. And that's an opportunity for us to be a part of a process and a relationship. And the idea of someone allowing an individual that you don't know to come into your home to take stock of your home and how your home operates, and to receive the support and the humility that's required of us as public servants, so as part of those that we serve, rather than to see them as subordinates. I really want to thank the youth and families who allow us to work with them, the community and their support. And then lastly, I would like to thank the staff that I work with. I think, we really do bring a commitment to go to the extra effort. And as I said earlier, this is a new normal. A lot of us were sort of like, in that first, I think, month or two, no, and definitely by third, a lot of our staff, because we're so used to doing with our young people, we're so used to being connected with them. And so in this new normal, what I and what I'm saying to myself is that this is an opportunity for to go within and to see where I am in my commitment, in my growth process, in my determination to serve. And as the director, of course, to be humble enough to use what comes out of that and that assessment as an example that offers an invitation to the staff, men and women that I work with, to continue to join in this commitment to serve our people. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Odom. And Director Lacey, before I wrap up.
Well, thank you, Manon, and thank you to CJCC for pulling this together, your whole team, and Yasmin for your outstanding facilitation of this conversation. And to my esteemed colleagues, it's an honor to work and serve with you. And so I appreciate that. I think that we all have been given and collectively have been entrusted with, awesome amount of responsibility and frankly, you know, a lot of power to make decisions that impact people's lives. And, you know, I know I can speak for the group to say that we take that seriously, and seek to handle that with great care. And the best way that we can do that, in my humble opinion, is to maintain robust and active and meaningful relationships with the community that we serve. And so I just want to thank those who are on this call who represent the wider community, and thank the wider community, because I think as much as we have been entrusted with the authority and opportunity to lead on these issues, you know, the answers are in the community as well. And so, and we know that we can only be successful if we tap into the expertise and into the will and the passion and the care that's inside of the community. And that's the only way we're going to be successful. So I'm again honored to be part of the conversation and look forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Lacey. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to our just amazing moderator, Yasmin Arrington. Thank you for facilitating this evening's conversation. I certainly want to thank the CJCC staff, Christy Love, Khalil Munir, Tammy Vines, Margarita Mikhailova, and our partners, the Clearing, Regina Perkins and Jonathan Spector, for assistance with the design of our conversation this evening. This is, as I started and noted at the beginning, a series. And really the importance, at least from where I sit, is that certainly we want to be able to have this conversation, certainly as we do internally. We also want to have this conversation with community, because to Director Lacey's point, this is a we thing. So we really have to work collectively on these extremely important and, quite frankly, vexing issues. That's the only way we'll be able to effectively tackle these issues that have been persistent. I invite you to join us in 2 weeks on the 16th, where we'll have our colleagues from the Office of the Attorney General, the AG Carl Racine, the U.S. Attorney, Public Defender Service. We'll have Director Buchanan again, as well as the Chief Judge from the Superior Court, discuss case processing and really focus now on the adult side of the ledger, and really looking at court operations. So I invite you to join us kind of the same time, the same and at the same and using the same channel. Before we wind down, we certainly invite you to, you know, if there are additional questions that bubble up that we weren't able to address during the course of this conversation, or that you think of after this conversation, we certainly welcome and invite you to reach out to us, and we will respond. We've actually we've posted the summary from our session, our first session on corrections. Is on our website, cjcc.dc.gov, and we will do the same from this. We'll produce a summary from this session as well, and it'll be posted. And we want to continue this conversation. We will also, before you sign off, I want to invite you to stay just a couple moments to complete a survey. And in that survey, we really invite your thoughts and recommendations for additional topics and community conversations to be had, because this really is, it has to be a collective, and we really value your questions, your comments, and your feedback. So please take a few moments before you sign off to complete the survey. And thank you all for your time and engaging in this evening's discussion. Have a great evening, and please continue to stay safe, mask up, social distance, all of that good stuff. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Manon.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.